Welcome to the Academic Writing Amplified podcast. On this podcast, we believe that the culture of academia needs to change radically. Women and non-binary people are revolutionizing academia within institutions that were not built for us. If you're ready to reject the culture of overwork, kick guilt and overwhelm to the curb, and amplify your voice to make a real impact on your field without breaking down or burning out, you're in the right place. With our team of experienced writing coaches as co-hosts, we'll share insights and talk to inspiring guests to bring you the practical strategies, systems, and mindset shifts you need to find time to write, publish work you love, and design your career on your terms. And it all starts with writing. Let's go. Hello. This is Kathy, and I'm just popping in here before this episode to thank you so much for listening. Now, the next few episodes on the podcast are going to be re-releases of our most popular episode about the post-tenure experience. That's because we're getting ready to enroll our post-tenure, mid-career, even into late career program, which is called Elevate. Now, Elevate is a 6-month program that runs from February to July of 2023. Yes, we enroll early. We want to give you lots of time to find out all the information about the program and decide if it's right for you. Elevate is an application-only program. It's also a program that centers the one-on-one coaching experience. So there's lots of juicy one-on-one calls, there's group calls, and there's also workshops in our Elevate program. On October 5th, 2022, we will be doing an information session live for you where you can come find out all about the program and get any questions answered. So find that link in the show notes where you can register for our live Elevate info session, which is coming up October 5th. As long as you register, you can come live or we'll send you the recording as always. And during that info session, you will get all the information about the program and how to apply. All right, enjoy this re-release mid-career episode. Hey there, listeners. Have you ever had someone on your campus talk to you about leadership? And a lot of times in academia, when we say leadership or when you hear your administration say leadership, what they actually mean is admin. And let's be real clear about what admin is, right? Administrative roles are roles like the director of the department, the associate director. They can be the chairs of major committees, like the curriculum committee chair. Yes, that's an administrative role, even if you're not paid as an administrator for it. Those kinds of admin roles, right? The roles that help the function of the university to happen, right? That's what people usually mean when they talk about academic leadership. But today I want to talk about what I think academic leadership really means and why it's so important that you understand the difference. So let's talk about what leadership means kind of on the campus, the department level, campus level for academics. Leadership means that you have ideas, you are expressing those ideas, and people around you, whether they be students or other faculty members or even administrators, right, are getting behind those ideas. So you can be a leader or show leadership or take a leadership role in your department without taking on an administrative role. And I think that many people listening to this podcast will identify themselves as that person, right? Like a person in their department that wants to make things better, that has ideas about how to do it, and that expresses those ideas. And you've got other people, you know, your colleagues and your students and the grad students and whoever saying, yeah, that's a good idea. They have something to say. That person has something to say. So let's listen to that and maybe take those ideas into account as action items that we should do. So it's a very basic description of leadership, but I think that it's time that you own that. So a lot of times we think if we're just doing our professor job, then we are not in academic leadership. But yes, you are. And again, it's a certain kind of person, right? It's probably the person who would listen to a podcast called Academic Woman Amplified, right? Somebody who sees more for herself and wants to expand her impact in the world, right? Like those are the kinds of people who are leaders inside their departments and on their campuses. You don't necessarily have to be doing paperwork, let's say, like administrative paperwork to be a leader. Now, what I would love for the world is that people who are leaders on their campuses are compensated for that the way that administrators are. But I hope you're starting to see the difference. And actually, I think that the skill set for leadership and for university administration might be kind of like an overlapping Venn diagram rather than one set of skills. So a lot of times when academics think about, okay, what do I want to do with my career? I want to have an impactful presence in the world. I want to take my research line to the places that I can see making a big difference in the field, right? Those are questions that leaders ask themselves. So if those sound familiar to you, if that sounds like your hopes and dreams, then you are already thinking about leadership. But I also want you to understand that just because you are a leader and people around you see you as that leader doesn't mean that you have to take on an administrative role in order to live out that leadership. And I'm going to give you an example. Maybe I've talked about this before on the podcast, but I'm going to give you an example from my own career, right? So, gosh, I guess I was tenured. I think I was tenured. Maybe, I can't remember. Anyway, somewhere in my career, I was the interim associate director of the department. And people saw me definitely as a leader in the department. And some people, thought that maybe I should be the chair or would like to have seen me take on more administrative roles. I was always like, that doesn't seem like a place I want to be. One of my very dear colleagues and best friends became the chair, and kind of people around, and she herself said, like, come on, do this thing with me. Like, you be the interim associate, I'll be the interim chair. Let's see how this goes. So I did that. And I did it for maybe only a year, and it was not for me. So that was an example, right, of people around me saw me as a leader, wanted to interpret that leadership into you need to be in an administrative position. I got into the administrative position and I was like, no. And for me, the no was around things like one thing, a simple thing that I really didn't like was like somebody always had to be in the office because if there was a student with a problem, like you had to run the office on like a 9-to-5 schedule. And one of the things I loved about being a professor was that I didn't need a 9-to-5 schedule, right? So that was one very simple example. Other examples like paperwork and like trying to navigate university bureaucracy and all of that stuff that took so much time and to me seemed pointless really pulled me away from my academic mission. Frankly, I couldn't see a path to enacting my academic mission through that administrative job. And as I got to see more behind the scenes, because once you're in admin, then you get to see, well, what does the dean really do? And what does this dean do? I was like, oh, yeah, I don't want any of that. None of that helps me to reach my academic goals. So again, I was a leader, not to toot my own horn, but I'm tooting. I was a leader in the department, but leadership and admin, an administrative position wasn't at all a fruitful way for me to enact my leadership. So I want to talk about what are fruitful ways to enact your leadership if it's not admin? And I'm also going to talk a little bit about why you might make the choice to go into admin. And again, all of this is around this idea of like, what does academic leadership really look like? So let's start to paint that picture. Academic leadership looks like you building a team around yourself in order to create the impact that you want with your career. Let me say that again. Academic leadership is building a team around yourself in order to create the impact that you want to create with your career. So let's take the impact piece of that first. As you progress through your career, you will likely become focused on the impact that you are creating. As a student, you're really focused on becoming a professional, right? Like getting the skills and the experience that you need in order to become a professional academic, right? If you're on the tenure track, early in the tenure track, what you're doing is you are trying to meet the requirements for tenure, right? You are showing that you have a future in academia. You are making your mark at the university. You are showing you can hang, right? with the people where you're at. Tenure requirements vary, right? Once you're past tenure, what I have seen what I saw in myself and what I see in the clients that I work with in our Elevate program is that the focus starts to shift. And when you look out on the many years that you have in academia post-tenure, we're talking like maybe you get tenure in year 5 or 6, maybe 7 if you took some time off. You still have 20 years left, to work. You start to really think even more about impact and legacy, right? Like, what do I leave behind? So, for example, in our Elevate program, that's one of the things that we really get into. We really help you to figure out what is that impact that I want to make? What is that legacy that I want to build my career towards? Like, where am I going here? Right? And also, how am I going to get there? Is the operational part is part of Elevate as well. But that's like the post-tenure question, right? Is like, what is the impact that I want to make? Leaders ask that question. Let me be clear. So there are people, absolutely, you're probably not listening to this podcast if you're one of these people, but there are people who get tenure and then they don't ask that question, right? And they're like, I'm good, I'm coasting, I'm just going to get done the minimum that I need to do, or I'm just going to get done this amount of things. And that is absolutely fine. And zero judgment around that. Like, what I want is happy academics. So if that's what makes you happy, then awesome. Don't think that most people like that are listening to this podcast because that's not our audience, right? So let me speak to you who's listening to this podcast. You, if you are mid-career, you have likely gone through the tenure and promotion process and on the other side thought, wait just a minute. Like, what am I doing? And how do I figure out how to get where I want to go? Because there are big things for me. So that's the first part of academic leadership, is having that idea that there is a big place that you're going and there's impactful work left to do, right? And that you want to get there. The piece that I don't think people normally think about is the team building piece. And so let's talk about that now. So academia, right, the culture of academia has this idea of like the lone scholar in an ivory tower toiling away. We know, however, as humans who are in academia, that is not real, right? Like, for most people, and especially now with so much interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary collaboration and the people working at the intersections of fields, the lone wolf thing is not it, right? We know that community is it, that partnerships are it, right? That building a network of people around you is it. But that lone wolf idea prevails. And there's a lot of dangerous pieces of the lone wolf One of them is you're expected to know everything. You're expected to do everything yourself. Unfortunately, nowadays, the everything has expanded so much, right? You're supposed to do paperwork and you're supposed to do things that before, back when professors were mostly white dudes, you weren't doing. There was a secretary and the secretary was doing this and that, keeping your calendar and doing all those things. Now, professors are doing that themselves, right? A lot of the day-to-day management is right back onto professors. And so you're dealing with that, and you think, or we're socialized inside of academia to think that we're supposed to know how to do that, right? And we're supposed to know how to do that well. The other dangerous parts of the lone wolf, right, is that if the lone wolf has students, then the lone wolf has this kind of model of teaching and mentoring that is very one way, right? I pour into my students and then their brains are full with what I poured in, right? Which also we know is not the way. So all of this to say, the lone wolf kind of style, or that image of what academia is, first of all, is just false. But also the way that holds people back from building teams around them is they think that they're supposed to do, hours and hours of email every day, that they're supposed to know how to manage their calendars intuitively. And there's, there's a lot of weight that we put on ourselves when we think we're supposed to know how to do everything and do everything alone. So leadership is understanding, and this takes some work, again, work that we do inside of the Elevate program. Leadership is understanding that you need a team of people around you, right? And leadership is also understanding that impact and legacy is building that team, okay? It's building people around you that are supporting you, and in the process of supporting you are helping to co-create that impact and co-create that legacy. So leadership is understanding that you can't do it alone and making the effort to learn how to build that team of support. So I'm going to give you some insights into how we help our Elevate clients to build that team of support. One of the things we do is we encourage them to take a look at how they're spending their time. And we ask them to look at how they're spending their time in the context of a concept that is taken from a Gay Hendricks book called The Big Leap, which is your zone of genius. Now, to give you the 2-second definition of zone of genius, your zone of genius is that special gift that you bring to the world. It is not the name of your occupation. It is not a list of tasks. It is your special sauce, your special thing that only you can do in this world. Or maybe there's other people who can do it, but it's definitely your thing, right? And throughout our lives, we're often taught that if we are bad at something, so if something is in our zone of incompetence, for example, then what we need to do is learn how to get better at those things that we're bad at. But what Gay Hendricks says, and what we teach inside our Elevate program, is that, nope, actually, leadership is understanding that you need to double down on what you're good at. You need to double down on your zone of genius stuff. And the more time and energy you spend in your zone of genius, the more effective your team building will be and the more impactful your work will be. So the purpose of team building is let's first of all, stop doing things that don't need to get done. Stop doing things in your zone of incompetence. Even in your zone of excellence, those things that you're real good at but aren't the thing for you, you need other people around you doing those things in support of your mission. And leadership is figuring that out and building it. And it takes years. It takes years. Okay. And I'm sure that you right now are imagining the different ways in which you could build teams as a leader inside of academia. Certainly being the dean is not the only way, right? You could have a research center where you are the head of that research center, but you don't even have to have a formal container, right, for that quote unquote team. You could start by simply using some of your indirect cost money to hire administrative help so that you are not in the weeds of email and paperwork all the time. Just that would be something. Imagine how much more time you could spend mentoring students if you weren't in the weeds of admin tasks that are in your zone of incompetence. So in Elevate, we really dive into this. We start with this up-leveling of your mission. So it's like the post-tenure or mid-career up-level of your mission. Like, what is it now? Before, during pre-tenure, it was this. Now you're here. What's your mission now? Because now is the time where bigger thinking is possible. And you are now a signed and sealed expert, right? Like you got tenure or you got the promotion, you are mid-career. There is no more proving yourself. Now you should be getting to do what you want. So the question is, what is that? It's a big question. You might think you know, but in the course of Elevate, we're always like digging in there and seeing what it really is, right? And then thinking, how do I build it? What do I do to build it? How do I use my time most effectively so that I'm creating impactfulness in my work and eventually a legacy instead of just a career? Because careers are cool. And if that's what you want, awesome. Zero judgment. I bet if you're listening to this podcast, you want a legacy. I bet if you're listening to this podcast, you want impact, right? You want to change something. You've got something to say. And you would love to see that said, right? And changed within your career, right? So before we end the podcast, let me talk about leadership within an administrative role container. Because also, if you're listening to this podcast, maybe that's something that you've thought about, right? In fact, when we look over the career of a professor, sometimes what we see as kind of, it appears to be that the only way that we can become more powerful, that we can have more influence, change academic culture, would be by taking on an admin role, right? Becoming a director of a department, becoming a dean, maybe becoming a provost, and doing things differently. Because then we're the decision maker. We're the one who can say, like, nope, we're not doing it that way anymore. Hey, our tenure requirements are going to be equitable, whatever. So if you're thinking that, then also, I would encourage you to still consider the same definition of leadership that I propose, right? That idea of, figuring out what your impactful work is going to be and building a team that is going to get you there. You can do that as a dean. Some of the team is built in and you probably have a bigger budget. So there's some ways. But I will say, be careful. You don't have to take on an administrative role in order to make cultural change inside of academia. You don't. You are making cultural change by changing yourself and by leading a team, by creating that whatever this structure is around you of support, you are influencing them and you're influencing your students and the people who come in contact with you. So the only way to change academia is not through admin. Absolutely not. There's lots of ways to do leadership. And that's what I really want to, leave you with for this podcast is a different idea of leadership and to start now to think of yourself as a leader. Because again, if you're listening to this podcast, I bet you got stuff to say. And I bet that you want to make an impact. And if that's you, then I would call that leadership, even if it doesn't fit the traditional definition of leadership within academia. Before I go, I want to make one more call to action for you to enroll in our Elevate info session. So if what I said today sounds intriguing to you and you would like to think more about how you're a leader and how you could develop your leadership to create impactful results for your academic mission and build the team around you in order to do that, if you're interested in your legacy, I would love for you to come and hear our Elevate info session, which is happening this week. If you're listening, not on the day that this podcast drops, the link in the show notes will still take you to a recording of our info session. So don't worry, you're not too late. But if you are listening live, I would love to have the chance to interact with you at our Elevate info session. The registration link is in the show notes. And I'll just tell you what to expect, which is a really detailed look at the program, an explanation of all the program parts, what the curriculum looks like, the results of some of our Elevate participants, and really a time to come and ask me any questions about the program to see if it might be a good fit for you. So I can't wait to see everybody at the Elevate info session this week. Have a wonderful day. Bye. Thank you so much for spending your valuable time supporting yourself and your writing by listening to this episode. If you like what you heard today, the best way to say thank you is to hop on over to Apple iTunes and write an honest review. The more reviews, the more amazing academic women and non-binary people will find this podcast. So go write one now.